to children, and a child is defined as any person under the age of 18. So that gives us a very broad understanding of human trafficking as we see it. If we move into furtherance of that, which is breaking down the purpose of why it's done, which is exploitation, one of those methods is sexual exploitation. And if we go into what that means, sexual exploitation is acts committed through non-consensual abuse or exploitation of another person's sexuality for the purpose of sexual gratification, financial gain, personal benefit and advantage, and any other non-legitimate, non-legal purpose. These acts are prohibited acts, and they can constitute many sexual offenses. I want to give you a few examples of what sexual exploitations can include. It can include observing another individual's identity, nudity, or sexual activity. It can include allowing another to observe consensual sexual activity without the knowledge of that person and consent of all parties involved. It can include non-consensual streaming of images, photography, video, and audio recording, prostituting another individual with or without mental capacity, exposing another person's genitals in non-consensual circumstances, knowingly exposing another individual to a sexually transmitted disease or virus. And it can also include making another person vulnerable to non-consensual sexual activity, in the cases of children especially. Those are some really overarching examples of sexual exploitation, which I think the panelists will definitely include and speak on to in a very micro level. This is a very macro level that I'm speaking on. What can sexual exploitation also look like? It can look like recording images and audio of intimate body parts, nakedness, or remember without consent, distributing images and audio. It can be revenge pornography. It can be viewing another person's sexual activity without their consent, or exposing someone's genitals without their consent. This all forms part of sexual exploitation, which is a really, really key factor in human trafficking. Then moving on a little bit further to child sexual exploitation, it's literally a type of sexual abuse because children can't consent, obviously. So a child or young person is exploited, and they can be given things like gifts, drugs, money, status, affection. And this will probably be explained a lot more with Romita in the sense of grooming. And children and young people are often tricked. There's one.
Sorry about that. May you just unmute yourself?
Cool, no problem. As I was saying, children and young people are often tricked into believing that they're in loving, consensual relationships. We've seen people accuse children of that very recently, even in the Indian community. But this is actually grooming and is a form of sexual exploitation. So that was very quick. And I hope I've covered everything nice and succinctly, because I myself, I'm not an expert in this field. So I'm here to learn as much as I am to contribute. The definitions are something I do understand, but I think I want to hold space for people who are have more expertise in this field. And so I tried to keep my portion really succinct for everyone, and I'm happy to add in here and there. So Nilesthra, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mayuri. It was very succinct but very informative. I just realized that there was one very important thing that I forgot, which is the disclaimer. So as much as Mayuri and I both attorneys, and Kaitlyn is also becoming an attorney, whatever information is given here this evening does not constitute legal advice and must not be construed as same. Also, the opinions and beliefs that we express here this evening are entirely our own. They do not reflect the beliefs and opinions of our employers or any organizations or institutions that we are affiliated with, unless specifically stated otherwise. With those disclaimers in place and our recording on, I would like to hand over to our expert, Romita, who is going to shed far more light on this topic. Romy, over to you. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, Ness, and good evening to everybody. Um, I'm so happy that you guys have decided to tune in because the key to overcoming challenges in life, I feel, is education and awareness. So I'm so thrilled, especially because the first week of October was obviously Human Trafficking Awareness Week, and then we've got Human Trafficking Awareness Month coming up in November. So this webinar fits in perfectly with what's happening in the country. So I'm so glad that all the terminology and stuff has been explained. So everybody should be on the same in the same boat. With regards to vigilance for human trafficking, I think the main thing, guys, is education. You empower yourself with the knowledge and the education of and the information of what's happening in the world and how you can go about stopping it. So I think education from a young age, possibly getting this into curriculums, into school, university, those type of things. That's for me that's the main indicator of how we can prevent it from happening to people. The next one I would say is community events or community awareness. Proactive action from the community should be at the forefront of social issues like these. And then, as I said, people should keep talking about it so more and more people know about human trafficking. We should also commit to helping human trafficking organizations, whether local, joining international ones like I've done. Empower yourself with the knowledge and spread that information to as many people as you can. Utilizing of social media, I think, is very, very important. That's how most of us run our awareness campaigns. Social media has obviously reach all over the world. So I think you utilizing your social media to get the message out there is one of those important indicators as well. With regards to, which is something that's very concerning, to adverts on, if you see that there's an opportunity that you would like to undertake and it looks all cherry blossoms and sugar and everybody is happy, and yet there's an underlying intention where you are going to go to that place and those people will obviously capture you or lure you or influence you, and you will be trafficked possibly. So I think background checks of companies, of organizations, that's very important as well. Also, to go with that, wherever you're going, let people know your whereabouts. If you're going for an interview, for example, when you get to the location, send your location to somebody via your WhatsApp, stuff like that. So, Nes, do you want me to just go into the different topics, or do you want to just lead me?
Okay. Romy, the one thing I want to tell everybody, sorry, as you're going on, which I should have stated earlier, but I see that Nikita has put into the chat. Everyone, this is a discussion. It's not just a group of us speaking to you. It's to facilitate a discussion. So please feel very free to drop your questions in the chat, or even to unmute yourself, raise your hand, unmute yourself, and ask the question. That is why our panel has assembled here this evening, to assist you with whatever questions you may have or discussions that you may want to engage in. Romy, on the topic of social media, you have said that it's great for awareness campaigns, and I know that all of us actually on here are very active on social media, and we do use it for activism purposes. But there is also the dark side of social media, which is social media which can be used to lure people and even children into trafficking rings and to untoward activities. So, is there any tool that you could possibly give us um, that that guide us about um, how to curb that from happening? And before you do that, I just share a funny story that happened this today when I posted a video to say, please join us on our human trafficking webinar. Some person who I had mutual friends with and I accepted their friend request messaged me on Facebook Messenger and said, are you single? Please talk. And then he said, on the human trafficking thing, if you want to know about it, watch Taken. And like the message was pretty like threatening and strange and uncomfortable. And obviously I blocked the person immediately. But these are the types of things that happen very often too, and that's a very small example of it. So how do we go about dealing with such scenarios and preventing our children and ourselves from being influenced in this way?
Okay, so besides utilizing social media, I think we must also mention that children are often utilizing gaming apps, and those gaming apps have chat rooms. Those chat rooms are also a place where predators wait, and they are looking for opportunities. So I think besides our Facebook and Instagram and social media platforms, we must also look at gaming apps very seriously because of the chat function, and you know what can possibly happen. With regards to online dangers, I'm very glad you brought that up. Some of the phrases, there's many things that one can identify online. So some of the phrases that I've seen in my research, sorry, I'm just recovering from the flu, so the cough hasn't quite gone yet. So excuse that. Yeah. So some of the phrases that traffickers use are very, very basic stuff that you would find innocent, but they could have a hidden agenda. So online phrases are as follows. DM me, let's chat privately. We've got another one that says, are you alone? This is a big lure tactic because obviously they are trying to see whether you are alone. Is there anybody to guard you against chatting to this person? There's another one that says, you seem sad, tell me what's bothering you. This is obviously appealing to the emotional part of the person. Another one would be, send me a picture of yourself or send me a nude picture of yourself. And another one is, I know a way that you can earn money really fast. Do you want to know about it? So obviously those that are seeking employment, are cash strapped, looking for easy opportunities to make money, are not realizing that their pictures will possibly be used in pornography websites, will be actually sold for profit. So, you know, that's another thing. There's another one that says, what's your number? Text me. So the person, obviously all of our social media have location services. Excuse me. So so they can get your actual location from your social media and from your WhatsApp if your location is on, because remember, they've got the tools to do all of this. Another one, which is quite simple, but is very double meaning-ish, if I can say it like that. I love you. That is something that somebody possibly lonely wants to hear, somebody that's isolated from their family. And when I talk about grooming, I'll touch more on that. And then another one is, if you don't do what I ask, I will show everybody the pictures that you sent me. So they use the whatever you've sent them you know, blackmail the victim into doing what they want. So they would say, if you don't send me another picture of you with your lingerie or with your bra or whatever it is, I will release the picture that you have sent, or I will edit the picture that you previously sent me, or I will take a profile picture of yours and I will put it on a naked body, and so the list goes on and on. So these are the red flag online dangers that we are currently facing, and that kids really need to take into consideration.
Thank you, Romy. As I can see that Slaz very pointing out in the chat that we need to clean up social media, which is exactly what he told me earlier when I shared this experience, which is very important. And there's actually a very good video that I think you've also shared, and we can also send to all our participants here about the steps to take to actually go about changing your settings and cleaning up your social media. So we will make that available. Okay, I've got a request here from on the chat to say that we should speak louder. I think it's Hannah-Lee. Hannah-Lee, can you hear? Can you hear now? Is it better for you? I have increased the volume on my side. On this issue of social media, and as you said, with children in chat rooms, children are very impressionable, and thank you. Children are very impressionable and very easily influenced. And Mayuri did touch on very earlier an issue that came up very recently within the Indian community, an issue that actually really, I found to be extremely disturbing. And she's referring to an incident where a girl who was 12 turning 13 was actually groomed and basically left home with her neighbor she was 13 and I think the neighbor was 36 or well in his 30s, and he was a father of 4 and he was the neighbor and they left home together. And what I found most disturbing about it was that the newspaper article that I saw was entitled 12-year-old elopes with neighbor. And basically it was it made it seem as if this little girl had willingly gone, and it was like very scandalously worded that she had gone and ran away with her neighbor, a married man with 4 children, which doesn't make any sense because a 12-year-old girl is incapable of consenting to these things. She doesn't know any better. And we can never ever attribute any blame to her in this situation and make it seem as if she willingly went with him and she eloped. That was obviously an incident, and as Samina is saying, irresponsible reporting, but also it also shows us that people sometimes, rather than looking at the deeper issues, want to make situations very scandalous. And it's something that we really need to protect our children against, especially children in communities where they are more sheltered and they are not aware that these sort of things happen and are therefore easily susceptible. So Romy, on that front, will you please explain to us what exactly is grooming and how it takes place?
Okay, so sexual grooming is basically a process where, in a nutshell, I'll just give you the nutshell view and then I'll just go into the stages. So it's basically a predator identifying a victim and taking steps to control the child or the victim into doing exactly what the predator wants them to do. So with regards to the stages, it's the 6-stage process that's usually used. The first one would be obviously targeting the victim, where the groomer would identify and target a specific victim. They will determine how vulnerable the child is. This could mean that the child may be emotionally needy, has a very low self-confidence or self-esteem, and obviously children that may have less parental oversight, they are the more desirable prey for predators. Excuse me. Then the second stage would be gaining the trust of the child. So while I'm going through these stages, I'd like everybody on the webinar to think about that 12-year-old girl as the victim, and think about the 30-something-year-old guy as the predator. So that's exactly what happened in this situation. So I just want you to keep that in your minds, and as you're listening to the stages and how they're doing it, picture it, and then you would be able to understand better. So the stage 2 would be gaining the trust of the victim, where he would establish a friendly relationship with the victim. They will ask questions and determine if there are any needs that can be exploited. So they would offer the victim gifts, give the victim access to drugs, alcohol, all of the stuff that the victim may want to experience, but because of limited means, or because their parents wouldn't allow them to because they're too young, this person, the predator, would give them the things that they would want. And then once the trust is gained, the groomer will then slowly but surely ask for favors in return. The third stage, filling a need. This is where the groomer begins to fill the child's needs. The predator will assume more importance in the victim's life. So the victim thinks this guy is my all, nobody else matters. So, and obviously it's backed up with the gifts and the extra attention and the affection that's been given by the predator to the victim. And this is the stage where, obviously all the stages are important, but this is the main stage where the parents and guardians need to be most vigilant, because if you can see that your neighbor is getting close to your child in a very friendly way, but you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable about it, immediately do something about it. Then stage 4, complete isolation of the child. The groomer works hard to separate the child or the victim, not just physically, but also emotionally, from the support network that the child has, which would be the parent, the guardian, friends, family, teachers. Sorry. At this stage, they would often emphasize the special nature of this relationship, and they start accusing the victim's support network of being overprotective, or don't worry what they say because they're just being jealous. These are the types of techniques that is used in grooming, and while they are making the victim's support system look bad, they would increase their place by placating themselves. So that's stage 4. Then stage 5 is sexual contact. This is where the child or the victim is desensitized to touch, and the adult will seek to exploit the child's natural curiosity using feelings of stimulation to advance the sexuality of their interactions. They start with small physical touches, maybe pat on the back, a small hug, a kiss on the cheek, all innocent. But as time moves on, the relationship and the sexual contact becomes more strong, and it goes on to tickling and massaging, and then eventually, sex. So stage 6 is the last one, where it's called maintaining control. This is very important for the predator, because once he's gained complete trust and once he's completed those stages in the grooming process, this is the part where he needs to keep everything together. So many groomed victims are led to believe that nothing is wrong with sexual contact, with giving out gifts between adults and children, despite such a huge age gap in that case that we were talking about. In some cases, perpetrators need only to casually mention a need for secrecy. So they would hint at saying, okay, something that I did today, maybe don't tell your mom about it because she'd get angry. So those are the type of techniques that are used. And then other times they try to confuse the child. They use threatening tactics. They use blame and fear. So they would say, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. So those are the 6 steps of sexual grooming Ness and the rest of the guys. And I think as parents and friends and families of kids and of young girls in our families and boys, so I think it's also important to say that human trafficking doesn't just affect women or girls, it also affects boys as well and males. So yeah, those are the steps of sexual grooming.
Thank you, Romy, for very clearly identifying those steps. From these stories that I've been listening to, it was very clear that even with adults, um, adults as well as the children, the traffickers look for people who are vulnerable, who perhaps are looking for something, whether it be attention or money or love or a sense of belonging. And once they identify that in the victim, they become very interested in the victim and ask them lots of questions and make it seem as if they are so interested in getting to know them and wanting to know what their favorite color is, what everything about them, in order to create that closeness and that bond. And once they've created the bond and they've been through that honeymoon stage, they identify what they're missing from their lives, like a sense of belonging or love or family or money, and then they provide it to them. And that builds like the bond between where they feel like the trafficker is actually making their lives better, until they start asking them for things and introducing that whole I give you love and then I or give you something and take it away, until it's like a sense of conditioning that happens. So thank you for explaining that to us and making it clear. And I see that also on the chat that fortunately, those of us who are on this webinar hopefully are educated enough to understand that a 12-year-old cannot consent and certainly cannot elope with a 30-something-year-old neighbor. Before we go on to Nikita's discussion of the purpose and cause of trafficking, Romy, if you could please just in the next 3 minutes, we will have more time at the end to discuss it, but just speak about your Trafficking Hub campaign, because that is also very important, and about the role of pornography in human trafficking as well.
Okay, so the Trafficking Hub campaign is something that I'm very, very passionate about. It's commissioned by Exodus Cry International. That's an international anti-trafficking organization that works hard to fight, modern day slavery and all of that stuff that goes with it. So with Trafficking Hub, Pornhub is the world's largest pornography site, and it's owned by one of the mega corporations in the world called MindGeek. And Pornhub has been seen and they've been complicitly broadcasting videos of actual rape of victims, child abuse where there's little babies involved. There's videos of babies in bathtubs. There's videos of babies being abused by, even in some instances, their parents. There's videos of camera footage in shower and locker rooms. So the Trafficking Hub campaign is basically aimed at shutting down Pornhub and holding them accountable for complicitly broadcasting trafficking and profiting from it. So, some of the milestones that Trafficking Hub has seen is it's an online, the main element of Trafficking Hub is our petition, where we've already received about 2 2.2 million signatures, if I'm not mistaken, from all around the world. So it's very, very successful. It's probably 8 months old and we've already received over 2 million. There's a viral video that's been uploaded. You guys can see it on any of my social media profiles or on www.traffickinghub.com. And that video has seen about 33 million views. So that's also another success. We've also had a lot of survivors coming forward with their stories. So many people are very hesitant to join the Trafficking Hub campaign because they think that it's just one of those fly-by-night campaigns that just wants to target the biggest pornography website and shut them down. But no, once this Trafficking Hub campaign was started, we've seen survivors coming forward with their stories. I can just give you a quick rundown of one of our survivors who has consented that her story be shared on social media. Her name's Rose Kalemba. She was taking a walk in her local neighborhood. She was held up at at knife point. She was raped for 12 hours. She was videoed, and those videos were later found on Pornhub. She didn't know that it was uploaded until somebody tagged her from her school. So can you imagine, guys? You've been through a trauma already, and now it's a trauma that the world can see. So it took her a while. She actually posed as a lawyer, and that's the only time they removed these videos. And just to say that there's countless other videos like Rose Kalemba's video that's the target of Trafficking Hub. Basically it's renaming Pornhub Trafficking Hub. That's the aim of the campaign. And obviously we want legislation to support survivors. And yeah, so that in a nutshell, you guys can find all the information on my social media or on traffickinghub.com. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Romy. As Nikita so aptly pointed out, and as I said right at the beginning of this webinar, we're not in any way or form trying to delegitimize the sex work industry or the pornography industry. Both of these industries are legitimate industries. We just have to make sure that when you do consume porn, it comes from a reliable source, not from Pornhub or Trafficking Hub, not from a place where the actors are forced into it, but are properly engaging in this voluntarily without duress or force and are properly compensated as well. On that note, I will hand over to Nikita, and as I'm handing over to her, I would like to just thank her for being so on the ball on the chat. But it's not just on the chat. Literally 5 minutes after I shared the link, she had already prepared the poster. So thank you, Nikita, for your enthusiasm and being such a driving force behind this effort.
It's a pleasure. It helps that I hardly have friends here in Sweden. Yeah. Basically, all I do is sit and talk to the dog. But thank you, Romy. And following on from your discussion, it's not just sex work that trafficking is about. So what I'm going to talk about first is the causes and the purposes of human trafficking, and the differentiation between sex trafficking and general human trafficking is that human trafficking does not just involve sexual exploitation. It is for also for cheap labor or free labor, slavery, for industries that are very low paying, and the people's passports, IDs, and any form of link to their home is taken away, and they are left without a home or agency. So that's an important differentiation to make, that human trafficking is not just about sex work or sex trafficking. And it's not always children. It can be absolutely anyone. So the causes let's start with the biggest one, and that is poverty. Poverty can lead people to do absolutely desperate things, and it's one of the largest contributors to human trafficking. It can drive people to become traffickers themselves. It can drive parents to sell their own children or other family members into slavery. And people in poverty are often targeted by traffickers who offer them a way to earn money when in fact it will actually earn them nothing, and the person will be treated as a slave. Poverty plays a huge role in many other root causes of trafficking, driving people to migrate, making education and legitimate work very difficult to obtain, and making recovery and safety from disaster pretty much impossible. War, natural disasters, and searching for a better life are also causes of trafficking. Traffickers look for people who are susceptible to coercion and draw them into this industry. These people tend to be migrants fleeing their homes because of economic hardships, natural disasters, conflict, political instability, etc. The displacement of populations exponentially increases individuals' emotional vulnerability, and frequently they don't have the financial support to protect themselves or even the education, and this makes them very subject to abuse through trafficking. And it's not, as I said, it's not just children, and it's definitely not like the movie Taken. It's not just beautiful young women from America who get taken from their hotel rooms while traveling through Europe. It is absolutely anyone. Anyone can be taken from anywhere, from outside their apartment to outside a school or even inside a school. Women and children are mostly targets. And in some societies, this is because of the devaluation of women and children in society. And this makes them far more vulnerable to human trafficking than men. Traditional attitudes and practices like early marriages, lack of birth registration for girls, the selling of brides and things like that further increase the susceptibility of women and children. And they're also targeted because of the demand for women in sex trafficking. Equality now states that 20.9 million adults and children are bought and sold worldwide into sex servitude, forced labor, and bonded labor. And women and girls make up 98% of those victims trafficked for specifically for sexual exploitation. Another cause is lack of education. It can lead to decreased opportunities for work at a living wage. It can lead to a decreased knowledge of rights, understanding of human rights, and susceptibility to being conned. All of these outcomes can cause people to be at far greater vulnerability for human trafficking. And in prevention of trafficking, education can empower children to make changes in their community as they grow. And this can prevent situations and vulnerabilities of which traffickers take full advantage. But it is a generational thing, because in a society that is uneducated, it's very hard to change old ways. And this is why we need to get our children more educated and more in the know. The demand for cheap labor is a huge one. So the service industry, particularly restaurants and kitchens, are common exploiters of human trafficking. A lot of restaurants that you see, especially in Eastern Europe, you'll see people who don't speak a word of English to the tourists working in the kitchens, or they don't speak the language of the country. And they're probably there because they've been trafficked. There's a demand for cheap domestic and agricultural labor, and employees, or I should say employees, are often initially promised a safe workspace, a steady salary, only to later find out that they're paid less than a minimum wage, if at all, and are worked to the bone. Business owners guilty of this behavior continue to practice illegal norms because the victims of trafficking can rarely protect themselves and have very few alternatives, especially when they are taken across a border and their identification stolen from them. Unfortunately, the demand for sex is, and let me differentiate between sex and rape. A lot of people do think that rape is non-consensual sex. No, there's sex and there's rape. So the demand for sex is kind of like a misnomer as such, because we have people who think that they're entering a sex industry, but it is actually completely non-consensual, therefore rape. Traffickers make a huge profit by selling people's bodies. And commercialized sex is a lucrative market that allows traffickers and pimps to become the only profiter from the victim through an endless cycle of buyers and high prices. And which takes us back to cheap labor. Because these women are not getting paid anything. They constantly change hands. And it generates such a profit. According to the ILO, the industry generates a profit of $150 billion per year. 2/3 is made from commercial sexual exploitation, while the remainder comes from forced economic exploitation, such as domestic work and agriculture, and is the fastest growing and second largest criminal industry in the world after drug trafficking. Lack of human rights to vulnerable groups is another thing. Marginalized people in society that lack institutional human rights can lead them to be potential victims of trafficking, especially if they are seeking help. One of the statistics I read not too long ago was that women at UN shelters in Somalia were being not trafficked, but essentially sold to people within the community, but were being pumped out to people in the community against their will for a huge profit margin to some of the UN members, which is absolutely terrifying. So they prey on these marginalized groups because they lack law enforcement, they are torn away from their families and societies in which they are supposed to protect them. And when countries lack fundamental laws regarding human rights, traffickers feel as though they can get away with what they're doing far more easily. A lack of human rights laws can end punishment for victims if laws and governments don't recognize the trafficking as exploitation of other people. Even in South Africa, this is utterly ridiculous in my research that I was doing in the past few weeks. There are certain types of trafficking that are still not illegal in South Africa. And that just scared me witless. The lack of legitimate economic opportunities can lead to increased vulnerability. Groups that are especially vulnerable are migrants without work permits, those who lack education, those who live in rural areas where there are fewer jobs available, as well as women within certain ethnic groups who may not be able to get jobs due to discrimination, like people who are considered untouchable in India. Traffickers offer seemingly legitimate jobs to these people who cannot get them otherwise, only to lure them into sex trafficking or forced labor. Social factors and cultural practices is quite important because it's so harmful. Bonded labor is seen as an acceptable way to pay off debt in some cultures. In other places, selling children to traffickers is normal, especially in poorer families. And in some countries, such as Mauritania, still practice antiquated slavery where families are held for generations by slave masters. In Uzbekistan, forced labor is still institutionalized. During the cotton harvest in Uzbekistan, all adults and children are expected to work in the cotton fields until all the crops are harvested. And obviously, this is not the owners doing it. Cultural and society's factors can also lead victims not to speak up about being trafficked or who the traffickers are out of fear. And especially if they are working for people who have a lot of power in society, that fear is increased because they might be hurt, killed, or worse, happening to the people around them, their families. Mm. And basically, they have a lack of option. But mostly, the biggest cause of trafficking is traffickers. The traffickers themselves are beyond cultural practices, profit, vulnerabilities, etc. Traffickers are the ones who choose to exploit people for essentially their own gain. While many of these factors play into the reasons why traffickers get into the business, these people still make the willful decision to enslave people against their will, either because of profit or beliefs that certain people are worth less, or a system of abuse they can take advantage of. Trafficking ultimately exists because people are willing to exploit others into trafficking situations. And this ties into the purposes as well. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what is at hand in each case. So the challenges in identifying these victims of human trafficking are because victims are well hidden or highly traumatized. And the purpose of keeping these people traumatized is to also keep them silent. They are too scared to confront law enforcement. They are too troubled to respond. Stigma prevents all of this from happening, and consumers of human trafficking contribute to the crime's hidden nature. According to the Urban Institute, traffickers and consumers are mostly aware of the huge risk they take by participating in illegal behavior, but they still continue to do it because of the knowledge that people do not come forward. So that is.
Thank you, Nikita. That was such excellent information on the various causes. There were so many, and each of them could be explored so much further, because there's so much to actually grapple with on this subject. But I'm so sorry. I know that we are slightly over time. We did start a few minutes late. If there is anyone that needs to leave, you are welcome to do so. But we do have Kaitlyn, and she is prepared to speak to us about the legislation. As Nikita made a very important point, that the laws are sometimes shocking in what it allows. And so we have Kaitlyn to speak about the Prevention of and Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act in South Africa, as well as the Palermo Protocol. So Kaitlyn, can we give you a few minutes to address us on these?
No problem. Okay, so I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for having me on the panel. It was an honor to receive the email and the messages. It was very sweet, and I'm very appreciative of it. And I just want to start off by saying that, like everybody else before me has said, we can always trace back human trafficking to the transatlantic slave trade. This is where everything began, and we can call it modern day slavery, but the truth is it's slavery in every way, shape, and form. And one of the problems that we face as a society is the fact that there's so many nuanced ways for trafficking to occur that, because it's so broad, finding a definition becomes difficult. And without a concrete definition, it's so much harder to enforce punishments and sanctions for it. And we're lucky enough that we have an international body like the United Nations who took it upon themselves to come up with a piece of international legislation that other countries could ratify and sign on to, and thereby make domestic legislation and focus on it within their own territories. So I can speak on behalf of all of us in saying that human trafficking is a human rights atrocity, and it's a hellish experience that an estimated 9.2 billion people in Africa face, according to the Global Slavery Index of 2020. And to put it simply, human trafficking reflects the idealism of slavery. And we saw it across the world. We saw it within South Africa, even in the Cape. And even though South Africa is one of 173 countries subscribed to the United Nations Palermo Protocol, we know that we're still not doing enough as a country to prevent trafficking in persons. We signed on to the Palermo Protocol back in February of 2004, but we only enacted the TIP protocol in 2007. Sorry, not 2007, in 2010. But it only came into force in 2013. By having this delay in the enforcement, it means that we had to focus on subsidiary pieces of legislation in order to prosecute cases of human trafficking. One of our biggest problems was trafficking in children. There's a difference in the definition of trafficking in adults and trafficking in children in the Palermo Protocol. And because we're a signatory of this piece of international legislation, it means that we have to subscribe to the minimum standards set in the protocol itself. So going back to what Mayuri was saying at the very beginning, there are three main elements to the definition itself of human trafficking. There's the act itself, which is prohibited, the means, so how we got this done, and the purpose. And the purpose is always exploitation. When we look at trafficking as a definition for an adult victim, we know that you have to prove all three things: the act, the means, and the purpose. But the Paloma Protocol acknowledges that children are inherently deserving of added protection. And because of that, the definition itself makes it so that we only need to prove 2 out of the 3 elements. This therefore makes it easier for our court systems to prosecute these cases. Now, when we look at the trafficking definition in our own national act, the TIP Act, our definition conforms to the United Nations minimum standards when it comes to adults. That we say, okay, these 3 elements need to be proved. This is how we prove human trafficking. And we go so far as to add significantly more means of trafficking to this list that's already been prepared by the Paloma Protocol. So that shows us that our government is looking and saying that, yes, this is a nuanced crime. There's so many other ways and so many other means that are used by traffickers to exploit people. But when we fall short of the standard is when we look at the definition that's used for child trafficking. Our domestic legislation makes it so that all 3 elements have to be proved. And what that means is it becomes more difficult for our state to prove that a trafficking case has taken place where a child is a victim. And this is a problem because it causes a discrepancy between the international law set in place and our South African domestic legislation. And why it's a problem is a lot of the time, trafficking, much like theft, is a continuous crime. So what that means is somebody could be a trafficking victim in South Africa, could be transported internationally, and then trafficked again and again and again. And determining when and where we prosecute this case is deeply affected by that country's particular legislation. So say, for example, a victim of trafficking was found in Italy and brought to South Africa. If our legislation is less beneficial than the international standard and that of Italy's, we're going to have a problem proving this victim's case and getting them the justice that they deserve. And we can't have that. We can't afford that in this country. Particularly in South Africa, when we talk about trafficking in children, there's a long history of how we came to determining what sexual trafficking is in children. When we signed on to the Paloma Protocol back in 2010, we had several pieces of legislation that had little amendments to them in order to cover this gap until our TIP Act was enacted. So we edited our Sexual Offences Act, we edited the Children's Act, and we had all these transitional provisions put into place, which is great, except that once we had our TIP Act enacted, all these little transitional pieces and the other pieces of legislation fell away. But our TIP Act in and of itself isn't fully enacted yet. That means that there are sections in the Act that Parliament hasn't given power to. And one of those sections that haven't been given power to at this point in time is all the reparations that victims need to receive. So that means when we prosecute cases, that we ensure that victims and survivors are afforded safe housing, that they are given socioeconomic resources in order to get back on their feet, and that they remain protected, that we make sure that any forms of like trauma counseling that they might need to receive is taken care of, that we ensure that if they are trafficked internally or externally from our own country, that they get back to their country of origin safely, that all these measures are in place to protect them. And until Parliament actually enacts these key pieces within the Act itself, it's sending a very clear message from government to our citizens that we're not backing them correctly, that we're not putting in the time, the effort, and the energy, because it is 2020. This Act was enacted in 2013, and Parliament has yet to do these things. But what we can do in the interim is create noise and shine a light. It's up to us as individuals to research and educate and to inform, because at the end of the day, awareness is prevention. And if we can sign petitions and make enough noise and get the right people to listen to what we're saying, and remember that our country is in fact a democracy and we're here for the protection of her people, we can create lasting and effective change, and it comes from education first and foremost. And I just want to say thank you to the other panelists for all taking the time to research and educate themselves, because for many of us, this isn't our field of expertise. A lot of us only know about trafficking insofar as movies and the mass media that we consume. And so much of that is watered down and sensationalized for our entertainment. But because we have no other information accessible to us, you start to believe it and think that this is the way the world is. Because we only see media that's based in America, we think, oh, this isn't a problem faced by South Africa, that this isn't a problem in our country, which is a complete and utter lie. And sometimes it's a lie that we tell ourselves to make ourselves feel safe in our own communities. But ignorance isn't bliss. And something that I've recently learned, especially from being able to help teach self-defense classes with Shine a Light and UCEC, is that a lot of people fall into two camps. It's either you're so afraid that you think that no matter what you do isn't going to be enough, or you think that you're completely untouchable and this could never happen to you. And honestly, neither of those mindsets are healthy or helpful to the situation at hand. You need to be able to be educated enough to understand the reality that you face without being held back by fear that there's nothing that you can do about it. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who showed up for this webinar, because this is the first step in prevention. It's educating yourself and taking that time to do the research. And I just want to thank the panelists again for having me.
Thank you, Kaitlyn. It is our absolute pleasure. Guys, I would just like to tell you that Kaitlyn actually just turned 24 yesterday. So for someone of such a young age to be doing such incredible work, Kaitlyn, we're so thrilled to have you. It is our absolute honor and we are so proud of you. In fact, I would like to appeal to every single one of you this evening to please go and follow Shine a Light and UCEC. Follow them on social media so we can all assist as far as we can. Please also sign the Trafficking Hub petition. And yeah, I would highly recommend to whomever's on here that's not following any of the panelists to please follow them, because you will find some excellent insight and some really good debates and activism and even some really funny memes. So there's a lot of really great knowledge here. And I'm so grateful to every one of you who've taken your time out on this Monday evening to be here and join this discussion. As Kaitlyn and as all of the panelists have said, awareness is so important, and education is empowerment, and that is the purpose of these webinars. Initially, we had a webinar on sexual violence where we tried to speak about as many things as possible, and we realized that the discussion was so broad that we could break it up. But even today, having a whole webinar on human trafficking wasn't even enough to touch the tip of the iceberg. But as long as it sparked some sort of curiosity in you to engage in further research, then our job is to a certain extent done. We are very happy to continue this conversation offline or on our own private social media, and we will stay for a few questions after this. But I just do want to wrap up for anybody who does have to leave. Once again, thank you to the panelists for your excellent insight. Thank you to every one of you for joining. And just to follow on from what Kaitlyn said, Section 13 of our Constitution in our Bill of Rights states that no one may be subjected to slavery, servitude, and forced labor. So this is a right that is enacted in our Bill of Rights and is part of our, should be part of our legislation. And hopefully we're going to make enough noise so that the people in power stop turning a blind eye to this very important issue. In the case, the Constitutional Court judgment of S versus Dodo, Justice Ackerman stated, human beings are not commodities to which a price can be attached. They are creatures with inherent worth and infinite worth. They ought to be treated as ends in themselves, never merely as means to an end. So on that note, once again, thank you very much for joining and being a part of this discussion. And let us each go away doing our part as much as we can to abolish this atrocity. Thank you, everyone. And we will open to questions, but to anyone who needs to leave, please please make sure you drop your email address in the chat before you log off so that we can contact you further and send you the recording. Any questions? Please feel free to unmute and ask a question if you're so inclined.
Ness?
Yes. Romy?
Trian, you can go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I just wanted to ask a question. Thank you, everybody. It's been so informative. I think the thing of educating and informing, or like teaching our kids about this, because we weren't brought up, we're just brought up like being told not to talk to strangers. But I mean, the more you read about it, the more like in an example of like rape cases, it's always the person that's known to the victim in most cases. So like where I struggle is that if you want to bring up your kids to be outspoken and say no and blah blah blah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
You're breaking just a little with your connection there.
Oh, flip. Sorry. Hold on 1 second.
In the interim, everyone, please do drop your email addresses in the chat. We will be able to send you the link to the recording once this is done, as well as engage with you further about further webinars and so forth.
May I just quickly make a comment while we're waiting?
Yes.
I'm involved with gender-based violence. I've launched a program called We Can Be Stronger Together. And, I love the fact that you guys have got the ball rolling, but I also wonder if there's some tangible project, because everything for me feels quite theoretical and quite abstract. And I wonder if there are some other practical initiatives that you're involved in where there can be some result or something observable that could be noticed. I'd be very interested in hearing whether you have any of those projects, because I find it's useful. There's so much to read, so much to absorb, and it's quite a dramatic subject. But I think at the end of the day, the question is, so who are you helping? And is there some direct contact with the victims per se and their families? I'd be very interested in hearing about that.
Thank you very much, Hanali, for your comment. So the purpose of this webinar is basically one of being informative and raising awareness and empowerment through education. But both Romita and Kaitlyn are very involved in anti-human trafficking efforts. So I'm sure they will be able to be in touch with you afterwards. Or Romy, if you have any organizations, if you could perhaps...
Yes, I put my email there. I'd love to hear more, because I'd like to tell more people about you and what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hanali. Yes, we, basically, rather than having a project of our own, we're here to, as Mayuri said, hold space for each other and hold space for other projects. So we believe in collaboration. And so we want to give everybody an opportunity to come forward and showcase their initiatives and their projects. So one of the immediate things that you could do as soon as you log off, please go and sign the petition for Trafficking Hub. That is the first step that we're going to do tonight, everyone. And then take it from there. You can also follow Shine a Light as well as UCEC, and you can follow Romita, and you will see they post things on anti-trafficking. Romita posts something at least once a day. And Kaitlyn was also very active on social media about anti-trafficking. So you'll find lots of ways that you can actually engage further and be in touch with victims and other organizations. Thank you, Hanali. Is Trian back?
I actually want to address Trian's initial point, because as soon as she said the thing about strangers. It kind of triggered something. We're always told, especially as an Indian community, don't talk to strangers. Do you remember that song, Don't Talk to Strangers or Get Into Their Car? Yeah. I think Indian kids
Before
remember
my
that song.
time. Sorry.
Yep. So everybody remembers that, don't talk to strangers. You have to have a safe word, yada, yada, yada. Majority of people who are abused by somebody within their family or within their community. And it is often somebody who is intimately known to that person, be it a family member, a family friend, whoever has access to a person who can gaslight them into believing that they are not worthy, that they are alone, that they have nobody else, etc. It is mostly people who are known to the victim who do the abusing. So we need to change our narrative. We absolutely need to change our way of talking to our children about it. And which is why I got so angry a couple of months ago when especially the Indian community was up in arms against the new sex education proposal. And obviously we need this kind of thing. We need positive sex education in our schools, because not talking about it is just making things worse. And talking about the fact that, yes, your priest can actually corner you in a church and rape you, that kind of thing. And not talking about it is just going to further sweep it under the carpet and cause more problems in the future.
Thank you very much, Nikita. Trian,
So,
would you like to
when
add?
I went to this to add exactly that, Nikita, is that, so I find like with my daughter, she's only 2, but I teach her like from a young age, stay away, blah blah blah, those kinds of things. But often in the community, it's seen as like you're being rude, and you're being disrespectful, and that your kid should always hug everybody and give everybody kisses. And I'm like, how then, being as educated as we are and knowing all that we know, and then still go forth saying, no, your child must still, follow whatever the older person tells them. Because I find it ridiculous, honestly. Yeah.
No, it really is.
Yes.
Because children should have complete bodily autonomy. We can't tell them one thing in class and say, beware of your surroundings and all of that, and then at home say, kiss your aunt, even if they don't want to. They are entitled to their personal space. They are their own people, regardless of how young they are.
Very, very true. We definitely need to make it a norm that children are asked consent before you just grab them and smother them in kisses and all of that. As much as that is the way that we've grown up, it's not the correct way, especially considering our current social climate.
I also wanted to just
Are there
add
any
that
other questions?
Sorry, Ness. I just wanted to add, we were talking about it briefly before we before everyone logged into the webinar.
Sorry, I think it's my internet.
I think it's really important for us to note that human trafficking, sexual exploitation is not, it doesn't discriminate. We need to check our own biases when it comes to our own communities and what we feel is normalized, what we think is normal, what we think is just an aunt and an uncle relationship with a child, for example, what a neighbor is or isn't allowed to do with your child. We need to be really cognizant of what we normalize in our culture, because there are a lot of biases, I feel, and I think as a panel, we also feel that sort of haunt communities where we don't think it affects us, where it is right there in our communities, regardless of race, culture, creed, ethnicity, it affects everyone. So be more mindful in your interactions and observances within your families and friends, especially.
Excellent point, May. Thank you very much. That's very true. We really do need to check our own biases. And on that note, I would also encourage everyone to follow Breaking Brown Silence, because it is offers very thought-provoking insight on. I know I myself have realized a lot of my own biases and prejudices from reading some of the posts and some of the articles that are recommended there.
To add to Mayuri's point, we were also talking earlier about the statistics that it's only between 50,000 and 100,000 reports of trafficking that get reported every year, over 2 years. When you this is in South Africa. So if you're looking at it, that in the Indian community, people say, "Oh no, it's just it happens to everybody else. It's not our problem." That is every 2 years between 5,000 and 9,000 people from the Indian community. 8.9% of those reports come from people in the Indian community. 5,000 to 9,000 people, and that should be sobering. Because yes, it can happen to absolutely anyone and by anyone as well.
Definitely. Definitely a very important point. Sometimes we do feel that we are above certain things and these things are not going to happen to us because of our culture or religion or our class or education. But human trafficking and many gender-based violence in itself doesn't discriminate, doesn't have any boundaries, and we're all equally susceptible, and we have to be cognizant of it. Any other questions? One last question, perhaps, or comment?
Yes, can I just give the rest of the guys that are here just a few indicators of trafficking or indicators of a trafficked person. So if they come across any of these signs, obviously they can take it forward and report it to the SA Human Trafficking Hotline, which is 0800 222 777. I just noted them down, but I didn't get a chance to read it out. Some of them include: the person may appear malnourished, may exhibit signs of physical abuse, they lack ID documents, they have scripted responses. So if you ask them a question, it would be yes, no, maybe, or it sounds as if it's been practiced, or the person next to them is saying the same thing. They have untreated sexually transmitted diseases. They have a tattoo or branding on the neck or the lower back. So human trafficking victims are often branded with the trafficker's name or cult or whatever organization, trafficking ring they are part of. They lack basic possessions. They're not allowed to go anywhere alone. This is a very important one as well. And they often reside at their place of employment, and they have their place of employment has covered windows and excessive security. And another one would be checking into hotels with older males. So those are just a few in human trafficking indicators of a trafficked person. So if any of you guys come across these signs, and if you feel that something's not quite right, then you can report it to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. I'll repeat it, it's 0800 222 777. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nicolette, you have our last comment or question before we wrap up? Because I can see that you are trying to say something. Nicolette? Hello? Okay, no, I think that may have been a mistake. Okay, on that note, thank you once again to everyone who stayed all the way to the end. We are very honored to have shared this evening with you, and we hope that you found it informative. And we look forward to engaging with you further. Thank you for giving us your email addresses. We will keep you posted on further webinars and also let you know. We will send you the link for the recording, and you're welcome to share that with your friends and families so that they can also be informed. So until next time, Stay safe and take care, everyone. Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Are we doing a debrief, girls?
Yes, just yeah, I had to like literally move the other people to the waiting room. Hi, thanks guys. I'm gonna stop the recording.